That is, he does all sorts of strange things, and you just can't keep up with him. You know, his mind's going back on him. My dear mother, when she was in her mid-80s, had a mental breakdown. And mother even became sort of wild. Really, it's hard for me to realize my gentle mother ever becomes violent, but she became violent. And you know, they say often when people like that become violent, they turn against those they love the most. See? And I want to tell you, she's threatened. When she had a case, she threatened to hit my cousin with it, you know. And she was really in her dotage. They call it senility sometimes. Moses wasn't senile. Right down to the end, God preserved him. God preserved him. Supernatural Holy Ghost. Could I ask you, Holy Ghost, how many of you have ever had the idea that Moses lived 120, because that's how long people ordinarily live in his day. See your hands on that good hand. I have had to give it. Oh, sir, it's a miracle of God. Just as much a miracle as if he stepped out in water and over the Red Sea and divided the water. All right, let's close with our last prayer. Exodus 33:18. Show me thy glory. Don't close your notebook quite yet, but close your eyes with me and let's just pray the prayer. Pray quietly first, then we'll pray together aloud. Show me thy glory. And remember, that includes everything God is. Show me thy glorious love. Thy glorious holiness. Thy glorious power. Thy glorious knowledge. Thy glorious omnipresence. Thy glorious all-sufficiency. Thy glorious justice. Thy glorious wrath. Show me thy glory. Once more, let's just pray it aloud. Show me thy glory. Everybody pray it loud with me, please, all together. Show me thy glory. Oh, do it for me, Lord, this semester. Do it for every one of these precious children and young people. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, let me give you your assignment, please. Just turn to your assignment page, and by number 2, write September 12th. Now, for those of you who are up at Tidewater, you'll probably have a different date for this, but Brother Tommy can tell you about it. The A is read Exodus chapters 5 to 14, and B, answer pages 48 and 49. Last time I gave you the acrostic on Exodus and part of the acrostic on Moses. So we'll complete that acrostic on Moses in just a few moments. M-O-S-E-S. All right, let's ask our pastor, Pastor Wood, to lead our prayer, please.
Unto thee will I cry, O Lord my rock. Be not silent unto me, lest if thou be silent unto me, I become like those who go down into the pit. Father, we do pray that this would just not be another class in time of learning. It'll be a time when we might hear from God. We ask that thou would anoint Mr. Sells to speak and anoint our ears to hear. For Christ's sake, amen.
Amen. My first general impression of Moses, I mentioned last time, is messianic comparisons. Comparisons between Moses and Christ. Comparisons between Moses and the Messiah. And I mentioned 5 of those comparisons last time. My second general impression, connected with the letter O, is organizing leader. And Moses listened to his father-in-law. Remember, his father-in-law had 2 different names. The double naming of Hebrew characters is quite common. Jethro, J-E-T-H-R-O, J-E was Jehovah in his name, and then Reuel, R-E-U-E-L, God in his name. And he said, you're doing too much of the work yourself. You ought to put other people to work. So Moses started this great representative government. One reason why the government of the United States and its laws is so wonderful is that basically it is based on the laws of the Old Testament. And isn't it a pitiful thing that today they're trying to keep God completely out of everything? One of our former presidents said that the Bible is the rock upon which our republic rests. And I believe it with all my heart. A lot of people think that the Constitution is the rock upon which our republic rests. The Constitution is very good if it's based on the Bible. That's the second general impression, organizing leader. And I told you what Moody said, I'd rather put 100 men to work than try to do the work of 100 men myself. Then we close with my third general impression, connected with the letter S, supernatural sufficiency. First, his supernatural deliverances, and then his supernatural old age. And then the last one is his supernatural meekness. Numbers 12, verse 3 says that Moses was the meekest man on the face of the earth. That's a tremendous thing to say. Moses was the meekest man upon the face of the earth. I like to contrast Exodus chapter 2 with Numbers 12:3. Exodus 2 introduces us to Moses the murderer. Somebody said Moses made a great mistake when he killed the Egyptian and hid his body in the sand. No, Moses didn't make a great mistake. Moses committed a great sin when he killed the Egyptian and hid his body in the sand. That's Moses the murderer. But God changes him into Moses, the meekest man on the face of the earth. It's often said that Moses' 2 weakest qualities, God turned into his 2 strongest qualities. One of his weakest qualities was pride and self-sufficiency. You see, he was brought up in Pharaoh's court, and he just had people know that God was going to deliver Israel through him. And so he murdered the Egyptian. He took the thing into his own hand. But then God changed that into great meekness. Moses, the meekest man on the face of the earth. Then the second weakness of Moses was that he couldn't speak well. You know, when God called him, he said, I just can't speak well. I just can't speak well. He made all sorts of excuses. Some preachers have preached on the excuses of Moses. And the excuses of Moses really centered in the idea that he just wasn't able to do it. He wasn't able to do it. But he wasn't eloquent. But you know, when you read the book of Deuteronomy, you think Moses must have been telling a lie. No, he wasn't telling a lie. He was telling the truth. He wasn't eloquent. But in Deuteronomy, you have some of the greatest sermons ever preached. That leads me to emphasize this, and you young people want to watch it as you seek God's will for your lives. I do hate the word career that people use, planning your career. And just the other day, somebody who's a fine Christian, can't recall who it was, used that word career, plan your career. I just don't find that in the Bible. Don't plan your career. Seek the will of God for your life. And what's happening often in Bible colleges and in Christian day schools is this. People say, now look out to see What are your talents? And then develop your talents. Go to a school that'll help you develop your talents. Take the courses that'll help you to develop your talents. The great danger of that is that there's a difference between a natural talent and a spiritual gift. A spiritual gift is something you would never have had if you hadn't been a Christian. It's a supernatural thing. And Moses wasn't a great preacher by natural talent, but by spiritual gift. You know, somebody here might say, well, I really stammer some, and I just know God would never call me to be a preacher. No, but preaching may be your spiritual gift. I know that people sometimes can think they're called into the ministry when they aren't. I realize that, but there's a great danger the other way. And so many people in Christian day schools today are spending all the time developing their natural talent, and they don't even know what the spiritual gift is, because they haven't met the Lord. Now, I think there can be an overlapping between a natural talent and a spiritual gift. But Moses, supernatural meekness, and then his supernatural power to preach. And some of the greatest sermons we ever have were preached by Moses. My fourth general impression of Moses is connected with the letter E. Evil opposition. Evil opposition. First of all, if somebody were to ask you, who was Moses' greatest human enemy? What would your answer be? Who was his greatest human enemy? Somebody say Pharaoh. Pharaoh was one of his enemies, but he wasn't Moses' greatest human enemy. Moses' greatest human enemy was Moses himself. What's your greatest human enemy? Yourself. Somebody asked a preacher one time when he was out ready to play golf. He said to him, what's your handicap? And what he meant was, what's your handicap score in golf? And when the fellow asked him, what's your handicap, he just said, myself. Yes, indeed. I like to express it sometimes this way and say, my greatest human enemy in the world is in South Carolina this afternoon. He's not only in South Carolina, but he's in Columbia, South Carolina. He's not only in Columbia, South Carolina, but he's right in this auditorium. And his name is Frank Sells. You are your own greatest human enemy. Romans 7:18 says, in me, in my flesh, dwelleth no good thing. And you see, the real victory that Moses had to get was the victory over Moses. Usually we think, oh, those people outside should act differently. If those other people would just act differently, then I'd be different. You know, many folks today are encouraging young people to blame their parents for everything that's wrong. You know, well, my mother didn't understand me, and my mother fussed at me, and my father did this, my father did that. And you see, that says your greatest human enemy is somebody else. Well, the fact is, even though your mother or father is not a Christian, don't you regard them as your enemies, unless they definitely oppose God's will for your lives. They're still your friends. They're God-given people to you. Don't you blame your mother and father. You blame yourself. You blame yourself. And we're going to see how that is illustrated as we go further in the book. John Newton is the great preacher who was a slave trader before the Lord saved him. And in fact, he himself became a slave. He became a slave of an African queen. And then after the Lord saved him, John Newton wrote that great hymn that is often called the Baptist favorite hymn, Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. And one day John Newton expressed this truth I'm talking about in these words. He said, a lot of people are talking about the Pope. And he said, the Pope's a great enemy. But the Pope that bothers me the most is Pope John Newton. Well, indeed, that's true. I didn't realize that until I was a sophomore in Bible college studying to be a preacher. And I really went through the depths in that year. I wasn't sure I was saved. And then I had the whole matter of how to be yielded to the Lord and a great many things like that. And I just realized my real enemy is Frank Sells. You are your own real enemy, and you need victory over yourself. And God gave Moses great victory over himself. So evil opposition. If you're in God's will, you can expect to be opposed. First of all, by your own sinful heart. By your own sinful heart. Oh, how my own sinful heart opposes me every day. And I just need to keep my eyes fixed on Jesus in order to have victory over my sinful heart. Then the heathen magicians were great enemies of Moses. Did you notice that the heathen magicians imitated the first three miracles that Moses worked? The first is in chapter 7, verse 11. Turning the serpent into a rod, and then turning the rod back into a serpent again. Moses worked that miracle. And chapter 7, verse 11 shows that the Egyptian magicians imitated that miracle. The second is in chapter 7, verse 22, turning the water to blood. Now you see, that was turning the Nile River into blood. Then the third miracle that they imitated was chapter 8, verse 7, the miracle of frogs. Frogs came up all over the land by God's miraculous power. And the Egyptian magicians imitated that. Now there are two ways to explain this. Some explain it as satanic power, supernatural power from the devil. Now whether that's true in this case or not, it's very true that God's not the only one who can work miracles. The devil can work miracles. And that's why when somebody just has his heart set on signs and miracles, he's in great danger. He can be led away by the devil because the devil can work miracles. Now that much is clear. I think the clearest verse on that is 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 9 in the New Testament. 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 9 in the New Testament prophesies the man of sin. Many of us believe that that's the one the Bible calls the Antichrist, the final great man of sin, 2 Thessalonians 2:9. And it says that his coming is after the working of Satan. Notice this, with all signs and powers and lying wonders. See, that shows you clearly that the devil works miracles. It's a significant thing that in Acts 2:22, the same Greek words which are used for the miracles of the man of sin, of the devil, in 2 Thessalonians 2:9 are used for the miracles of Christ. Same Greek words. Acts 2:22, 2 Thessalonians 2:9. So it's very clear that God's not the only one who can work miracles. Satan can work miracles. And that's the way some people explain this. Personally, I don't see anything in this passage that means it has to be a miracle. I believe it can all be explained as sleight of hand. These heathen magicians knew their tricks. Sleight of hand. Been a long time since I've seen a magician. I think there can be such a thing as a good magician. I think a lot of magicians are corrupt, but some of them aren't. I always like to be fooled. You know, a lot of people try to spend all the time figuring out how the magician did it. I didn't know exactly how he did it, but I just enjoyed watching him do it. You know, he'd take an egg out of his ear and all sorts of things like that. That kind of thing has always interested me. Well, I think this was sleight of hand, and let me show you why I think so. Chapter 7, verse 11. The miracle of turning serpents into rods and then back into serpents again. Now that was a miracle of Moses. That wasn't sleight of hand on Moses' part. But I think it was sleight of hand on the magician's part, because that was a common sleight of hand performance for the Egyptian magicians. They would take the serpent around the eyes and press him in such a way that the whole body would be completely stiff. And then they take it by the head and snap it down on the ground. And when they snapped it down on the ground, then it would wiggle like a snake again. And I think that can be explained just as sleight of hand. The second thing is water to blood. Now you see, Moses worked a miracle turning water to blood. The whole Nile River, all over the land of Egypt, became blood. That wasn't sleight of hand. It's a mighty miracle of God. But you see, you can take a limited amount of water And incidentally, remember that at the time when the water all over the land of Egypt had been turned into blood, there wasn't too much water left. They had to dig down and get their wells and so forth, and the magician took a limited amount of water. I told you last time that some try to explain away that miracle of turning the Nile River into blood by saying that there's this reddish-brown soil on the floor of the Nile River. And then when that becomes mixed with the waters of the Nile and the sun shines on it in a certain way, it looks like blood. No, but they did something like that. They would have some kind of coloring. There are any number of substances. It's interesting, we have certain scientific discoveries today, but these ancient people had some discoveries that modern people think are better than any we've been able to develop. You know, that's one thing they say about the Roman roads. We've got our interstate highways, but our interstate highways aren't anything like as good as the Roman roads. We'd like to learn something of what they learned in having the Roman roads. So I think this water to blood could be explained just a sleight of hand. And then the third, bringing up frogs. And you know, that's a common thing for a magician to do, bringing up frogs and everything like that. My only first-hand experience with a magician was a time when I was a student down at Dallas Seminary. I had taught the men's Bible class in a certain church, and we had a certain social occasion one Friday night, and they had me speak and tell about my trip to Palestine just a few months before. And we had a magician there, and he did some interesting things. And he pulled the same trick on me that he pulled on many others. He took a whiskey bottle out of my pocket. Well, he got a big bang out of that. All the men just roared over that, you know. And evidently, he saw that I was just a little bit embarrassed, and he said, "Don't worry, preacher, that same whiskey bottle has come out of the pocket of many preachers before you." See, that's the only time I had a first-hand acquaintance with him. I'm thankful to the Lord that was sleight of hand on his part, and I've never had a whiskey bottle. The Lord's kept me from that, and I thank the Lord for that in every way. Now, you see, there are two interpretations. You could take it that these were mighty miracles through Satan's power, not through God's power. And many earnest commentators take that position. The other is sleight of hand, and in this case, remember, this wasn't sleight of hand on the part of Moses. It's a mighty miracle of God. But I don't see anything here that could not be explained as sleight of hand. But see, again, opinions differ. And you may hear some preacher preach on this sometime and say that's satanic power. Well, you may agree or may not agree in this point, but you know the devil has the power to work miracles. Don't forget, please, 2 Thessalonians 2:9, along with Acts 2:22. All right, evil opposition. I was reading something from Spurgeon the other day, and he said, if you're opposed, that means there's something in you worth opposing. And if you're never opposed because of your stand for the Lord, that means there's nothing in you worth opposing. And oh, how every Christian needs that. Woe unto you when all men speak well of you. Well, Moses is one of the greatest people who ever lived. But did he ever have people who spoke against him? My fifth general impression of Moses is connected with the letter S. Salvation judgments. Salvation judgments. S-A-L-V-A-T-I-O-N. S-A-L-V-A-T-I-O-N. And then judgment, J-U-D-G-M-E-N-T-S. It can also be spelled correctly with an E. I know I corrected a person one time. Said he spelled it J-U-D-G-E, like judge, mence. And I said, no, that's wrong. He said, check your dictionary. And the dictionary gives you both ways to spell this correctly, J-U-D-G-M-E-N-T-S or J-U-D-G-E-M-E-N-T-S. And then put a hyphen between, you know what a hyphen is, just a little dash, between the word salvation and the word judgments. Salvation judgments. One great message of Exodus is that redemption comes through judgment and mercy. Redemption comes through judgment and grace. And you have this greatly illustrated in Israel's deliverance from the land of bondage. There's a verse in Isaiah that means a lot to me in my Christian life and in my prayer life. And I like to use it especially in connection with the plagues. It's Isaiah 19:22. Isaiah 19:22 shows how God is going to turn certain people to himself. And it says, smiting and healing. Smiting and healing. See, those are the two things God used to bring the Egyptians to himself and to deliver the Israelites. Smiting and healing. Let me ask you, we say that Moses is the great leader of Israel. When he led Israel out of the land of bondage, did he lead anybody else other than the Israelites? Yes. Exodus 12:38 is a very important verse. Exodus 12:38 says that when they went out, the Israelites, a mixed multitude went with them. Who were those in the mixed multitude? See, they were Gentiles. They were Egyptians plus those of other nationalities. And it's perfectly possible, and I think very probable, that you're going to meet in heaven some people who were saved because of the plagues. Some of those Egyptians turned over and said, this is the true God. You see, each one of these plagues was directed against one or more false gods of the Egyptians. And you say, well, what was the point of that? One point of it was to save souls. Often people have the idea now the Old Testament just points to salvation that's going to come in the future. Yes, it's going to come in the future, but salvation takes place all through the Old Testament. And I believe you and I are going to meet in heaven some of these who were saved through these miracles of the plagues. See, smiting and healing. Smiting and healing. God smote and then he healed. Then in the second plague he smote. And then he took the plague away, he healed. And then in the third plague he smote and he healed. And so on all the way through. Now those are the two parts of God's method of saving souls. Often when we pray for people to be saved, we just pray, heal them, Lord. Heal them. No, a full prayer is smite and heal. Smite and heal. It isn't complete unless we do that. Someone was telling me the other day of a person over in Sumter who'd been under Brother Jim God. Brother Jim God was telling me on telephone, had been under his ministry over there, and was saying that he was praying against Saddam Hussein. And the people lifted their eyebrows. No, don't pray against him, pray for him. Pray for him. So they had prayer at the close, and at least one person prayed for Saddam Hussein. Somebody else might say, I'm going to go pray for him. I'm going to pray against him. Pray both. Pray both. That's this, smiting and healing. Smiting and healing. He'll never turn to the Lord unless he's smitten and healed. Now, God may smite him and he still won't turn. But God uses those two things. And oh, how we need that in intercessory prayer. I want to apply that idea of praying that God will smite and heal to prayer in four different directions. One is our prayer for international matters. You know what we mean by international matters. Saudi Arabia. What's going on in the Middle East? What's going on in Russia? What's going on in Germany? Oh, it takes your breath away when you realize an awful lot's been happening, and yet I don't know exactly what's been happening. God knows just what's happening. I don't know how much of it's good or bad. God knows. But when I pray about international matters, ask God to smite and heal. Not heal, but smite and heal. And not just smite, but smite and heal. Both things are needed. Wouldn't it be a wonderful thing, though, if Saddam Hussein were saved? How many of you believe it's possible for God to save Saddam Hussein? How many of you believe God's going to save him? Now, one or two raise your hand, you old hypocrites. You know you don't believe it. You know I'm kidding you on it, but it sounds awfully good, you know. You read it in the Bible, God's able to do it. You remember, well, that was over at the other church, where Brother Brother Tom was talking about God can. Oh yeah, God can. Yeah, God will. God will. And then I want to add something else beyond that, and God is. God is doing it. See? It goes even beyond that. But you ask me, do I believe that Saddam Hussein is going to be saved? I say, no, but I'm praying towards a place of faith. I got that from Dr. Robertson Quilkin out at the Bible College. They've had it out there for years, but I got it especially from him. We need to pray to a place of faith. And then, after we've reached that place of faith, then we can pray on more in detail. I think there's a great deal to that. And that'd be wonderful. But, I tell you, there's not a chance for that man repenting unless he's smitten. So smite him and heal him, Lord. Smite him and heal him. Prayer for international